Brilliant. Thank you very much. First of all, could you welcome Joseph and Olivia, who are our British Sign Language interpreters for this session. Just to manage your expectations, because you're now officially in a 35-minute, 40-minute hostage situation, I'm going to start. I wrote the blurb for this session about 4 months ago, and I'd kind of forgotten what I promised to talk about. So what I'm actually going to be talking about today is our visitor sentiment research, how visitors are doing at the moment, what they're prepared to spend, what they're prepared to pay for. I'm then going to take you into a whole section I call bleak and challenging times, and then we're going to go upbeat and perky towards the end, where I'm optimistic and giving recommendations about the future. So, 2024 visitor figures. So, as you probably know, every year in March, we publish all of the visitor figures for our members for the previous calendar year. And it always gets huge amounts of publicity and attention, partly because it's a list, so it looks like a sort of tourism top of the pops. But it's also quite a useful barometer, if you like, of the health of the visitor economy, but also the confidence that people have got in the cultural sector and in visitor attractions. Now, last year, we saw only a very modest increase in visitor numbers of 3.4% in 2024. So this is coming out of the third year, fourth year after the end of lockdown. Now, 3.4% is okay, but it's not stellar. And what our press release talked about was that we always said during the pandemic that tourism was going to be hit first, hit hardest, and would take the longest to recover. And that's proved to be absolutely the case. Now, some people, of course, we have 93 members in ALVA, and they're across the whole of the UK. So some people, of course, will have had visitor increases in the region of 20, 23, 24%, and others still not up to pre-pandemic levels. So 3.4% really interesting, but actually the most interesting one is probably this. So we're still missing a big segment of the audience who has yet to come back, and that's about 8.8%. And I should say, visitor numbers are not the be-all and end-all. They're not the most important illustrator of success or indeed depth of engagement. And actually, 2019 was a stellar year for many visitor attractions. So if your trustee boards, for example, are comparing you now to what your performance was in 2019, you're not comparing apples with apples. You're comparing apples with oranges. So there is a kind of health and safety notice attached to this figure. That said, who constitutes the missing groups? Well, the number one group is the Chinese market. They came out of their own version of lockdown much later than anybody else. When they came out of their own version of lockdown, they visited within China and then within Asia, and now they're going long haul to Europe and particularly to the United Kingdom. We had really high hopes that the Chinese market would be back to its pre-pandemic levels, 2019 levels, by about Lunar New Year, February this year. And we've had to put that back even longer because of global economic turmoil. So we're hopeful, optimistic, but I wouldn't get a mortgage on it, that the Chinese market will hopefully be back by about this time next year. Why are they important? They're really important because they're big numbers and they're big spenders. So for those of you for whom the Chinese market was really important pre-pandemic, you will have really missed them. So hopefully they're going to come back soon. The second market who's missing is more important on lots of different levels. And if you've read this already, you're probably going to think, I'm a really mercenary person. But if this was a forum of fundraisers, they would get this completely. So when lockdown ended and people started coming back to museums and galleries, visitor attractions, it was really clear from the outset that we were missing about 30%, 30% of older demographic, so 65 plus, who particularly were not coming back to performance venues, particularly theatres, particularly classical music, and particularly small, intimate museums and galleries and temporary exhibitions. And we checked amongst our members to say, is this everybody? Or is this just one or two organisations? And it was everybody. So we did some research with Maurice Hargreaves McIntyre and the Royal Opera House and the Royal Albert Hall and the Wallace Collection and the V&A to ask, A, is this group missing? B, what are the reasons that they're missing? And the answers came back was, yes, they are, and they're missing between about 25–30%. And when asked, we said, why aren't you coming back? And the number one reason then, which is 2.5 years ago, was COVID anxiety. So people not coming back because of a fear or just an anxiety about coming back to intimate indoor spaces. And number two, I've gotten out of the habit. It's 4 years on. Number three, I'm consuming, terrible word, but you know what I mean. I'm consuming classical music or theatre digitally rather than being on site. And number four was cost of living crisis. Now in ALVA, we did that research again last year, and cost of living crisis was number one, and then COVID anxiety was number two. So it completely changed. And you think, hang on a minute. I mean, we all know, we've all heard the stats, that this generation, the older generation, 65 plus, is not all of them, of course, but it's the richest generation in British history. And over the course of the next 15 to 20 years, we're going to see the largest transfer of cash from one generation to the next. The boomer generation inheriting those houses, big pension schemes, etc., etc. So we thought, hang on a minute, if you're saying cost of living crisis is the number one reason, but you're the richest generation in history, what do you mean? And then it became clear that what they meant was that they were fine themselves, but their adult children and their grandchildren were going through a cost of living crisis. And so rather than going to the places that they used to go to and spend good money, they were now taking their adult children and their grandchildren, multi-generational tourism, out to places that they wouldn't necessarily prioritize themselves, but they're paying. And suddenly it makes sense. Except that if this oldest generation, the richest generation in history, isn't coming to your site, you are not front of mind when they're writing their wills. And the look of horror in the room at what I've just said, I think tells you this is something you need to be thinking about. So the legacy piece about getting those people on site to have that sort of reminded Damascene conversion is a really important one. Talk to your fundraisers, they get this. So, business update. How are businesses doing at the moment? People are still seeking deliberate memory-making experiences, and they're really prepared to pay for them as well. I'm going to come back to that a little later. Second, it feels like an age now, particularly on the hottest day of the year, but Halloween, winter lights, Christmas actually sold really, really well. The National Trust, for example, had their second best Christmas ever. So nostalgic programming, Meeting Father Christmas, old school, Victorian. It's no surprise to me that the Dickens play, I've just forgotten, what's the Dickens Christmas play? Christmas Carol. Christmas Carol will be 7 years running at the Old Vic Theatre this year. Take the hint. People are still really feeling the need for nostalgic and comfort and warmth, and I'll come back to that a little bit later as well. Winter experiences sold very, very well, but were, of course, significantly impacted by the named weather storms, all of which, annoyingly, happened on a weekend and not on a Tuesday morning. And so the amount of refunds and capacity and trying to find those various slots was a real challenge this year. So they've sold really well. Easter, this feels old school now, but the greatest determinant factor of the success of Easter was weather. It feels like we're going back to the 1990s or to 2000s. So if you were an outdoor site in an area that had good weather, you largely did really, really well. And particularly if you programmed it with, like the National Trust did, with Easter egg hunts and those kind of things. And the National Trust tell me that they put their price up a little for the Easter egg hunt, absolutely fine, no pushback whatsoever. So people are really prepared to pay for those experiences if they're done well and they're authentic. This, I think, is a really telling one if you want to plan for staycation this year. So last year, we had a record number of people flying out of the UK for Easter holidays. And that was because it was on the back of a really, do you remember the weather last Easter was just absolutely appalling? And that was after the wettest and coldest winter in 10 years. And then last summer, not brilliant at all. So people were cumulatively thinking, if you think I'm going to go away, if you think I'm going to stay at home next week, you've got another thing coming. I assumed that that might have happened this Easter, but it didn't. And that, for me, is a really good sign of people's lack of confidence in the economy. So my prediction of fewer people flying abroad for sun this Easter as compared to last Easter is a lack of confidence in the economy and potentially an increase in staycation this year. So that augurs well for family discounts, family memberships, staying at home, summer programming. I think people are going to make decisions about spending more time at home this year in the UK than they would have done last year. ALVA 94 members, one of the fora that we have 12 different fora as heads of membership. So they come together every 6 months, and we always do a survey and ask what the average membership retention rate is, i.e. you keeping up your membership of National Trust or English Heritage or Art Fund or National Portrait Gallery. Pre-pandemic, it was a staggering 81%. Now that's off the charts good when you consider that the average retention rate for gym memberships, is 37%. That's a different workshop, it's a different conference. So we'll stick with the visitor attractions. So 81% pre-pandemic. That's now gone down to 77%, sort of unsurprising, but 77% is still a phenomenal number. And what that tells me is that people are still emotionally and intellectually wedded and engaged with your attractions, but the cost of living crisis is kicking in. And they have to make some really tactical choices as to how they spend their leisure pounds and their leisure hours. And the other thing that confirms me in that thought is this. So whilst people are keeping up their memberships, largely, they're just using them less frequently. And on average, they're using them 15% less frequently than they did pre-pandemic. And the really interesting thing is that that is as true of zoos and galleries and cathedrals and heritage properties. So it's right the way across the board. So this is another really strong cost of living exercise. And then the last one is pre-pandemic, members used to say, I often think of as a member's day as a free day out, and that gave them sort of emotional permission to spend in the shop and spend in the cafe and all the rest of it. Now, in a cost of living crisis, people are going out with a mental daily budget. And they know that actually getting there is going to cost, and feeding the kids is going to cost, and probably buying in retail is going to cost. So they're just spending less. So in order to get their money, you have to be really persuasive and convincing. The only thing that I'd say, just on the back of this before I move on, and I'm moving on to, just to warn you, dark place, then sunny uplands and positivity and perkiness. What's perky? Perky, okay. Right, your competitor now, as a visitor attraction, is not the one down the road. And it's not Alton Towers. And it's not the nearby museum and gallery. And it's not necessarily even B&Q. Increasingly, the choice that people are making very tactically about how they spend their leisure pounds and leisure hours is between you and a subscription to Netflix. or Amazon Prime, or Disney Plus. So you have to be as good as, if not better value, than those subscriptions. So again, it's a bit of a sort of challenge to you that those are your competitor set, not the other museum and gallery or heritage site down the road. So attractions need to make themselves look at providing more affordable experiences for people on a budget. I've just included face painting in that if you're a charge for site, but you provide free activities on site for people who've already paid, tell people that you're providing free activities if you've paid, because that will often make the difference on a Saturday morning between choosing you and choosing someone else. So you might think it's a normal part of your experience collateral, but if people don't know that that's what you do, or that's what you provide, or that's what's going to be available on Bank Holiday Monday, they're going to choose someone else. So be really clear, particularly with your social media marketing, which is much more digital and responsive and last minute, what you've got. The free or heavily discounted tickets for people on universal credit or pensions benefits is becoming increasingly the norm. So in ALVA, probably about 3 years ago, there were only about 3 or 4 of our members who were providing either £1 or free or heavily discounted tickets for people on universal credit or pensions benefits, or for whom their children were eligible for free school meals. Now that's exploded, and it's partly because of the really good examples that people like ZSL, Mary Rose, Portsmouth Historic Dockyard, Historic Royal Palaces, London Zoo have been able to share about what the effect has been of doing those free £1 subsidised tickets. You're bringing in a completely different demographic who've never been before, because the barrier for entry to them wasn't a psychological one, it was an economic one. It was the P word, poverty. And so you're bringing in a completely demographic. Their behavior is often a little bit different as well. Their spending is often quite different. They tend to spend with cash as opposed to debit cards. And they come back more frequently than the average member, because they're seeing it as a free or discounted day out. So do think about that. What I mean by cannibalization is that many trustee boards were saying, I love this idea, and it speaks to our existential reason for existing. Who do we exist for? Why are we here? What is our social value and social mission and social purpose? And can we be sure, and this is them asking the right questions, not being exploitative. They're saying, are we sure that the people who are now getting £1 tickets or free tickets, did they pay full whack in the past? And all of the best evidence is that that's true of about 7% of people who now get free tickets, but who had in the past, because you can tell by email addresses, who had in the past paid full price. But when you pick down and see, well, what's happened, in the vast majority of cases, their circumstances have changed. They're now out of work, or they're on disability, or they've retired, or whatever it is, but their economic circumstances have changed. So again, you're not comparing like with like. The world has moved on. We've just commissioned Baker Richards to do some research into the family market and the opportunities afforded to the family market this year. And it's going to be available in about 5 weeks' time, 6 weeks' time. And we'll be sharing very openly, very freely, the headlines from that, not just for ALVA members, but for the wider attractions sector. First of all, I want you to see how the word Trump is signed. I think I'll leave it there, and that's going to be the highlight of the day. Donald Trump. Sorry. A number of people have been asking me in the course of the last 100 days, what does Trump mean? Well, A, what does Trump mean? B, what does Trump and the global economic impact that he's heralding, what does that mean for UK tourism? And what do we think the next 4 years of a Trump presidency are going to look like? And the quick answer is, I don't know, because nor does he. The longer answer is, we can take stuff from the previous administration and from the last 120 days and make some really good guesses. And the first is coming back, and apologies for the language, coming back to bite Trump in his own ass. There is now, as a result of his decisions over the last 120 days, a much greater likelihood of a US recession. Now that will mean fewer Americans traveling out of America, and particularly to Europe and the UK. If I were a betting man, I would expect there to be a downturn in American visitors and their spend from America to the UK this year. I think the fact of an American recession will have a sort of ripple effect across the global economy, including here in the UK. Here in the UK, we're already technically in recession. I think it's possibly likely that that will deepen unless Chancellor Rachel Reeves does something really quite dramatic in the course of the next 3 or 4 months. So 3/4 of economists have cut their 2025 global growth forecast, bringing the median from 2.7% from 3%. That's really quite a significant re-evaluation. A UK recession and continuing costs of living crisis, I think, augurs well for staycation, family memberships, and value proposition and value day out. And as I just mentioned, outbound travel from the UK at Easter was down compared to last year. I think that's a sign of a staycation for this summer. But the US is missing out too. Adam Sachs of Tourism Economics said that they predicted a 9% increase in international visitors to the USA this year. They're now predicting a 12% drop in international trade to the UK. Journeys from Europe to the United States over the course of the last 3 months have dropped by 37%. Canadians are cancelling their trips to America. You've probably all seen this or know a family have cancelled their trips to America in droves, and they're actually coming here to the UK, not in the numbers that would outweigh the loss of Americans, but we're picking up some Canadian traffic that would have gone to Las Vegas and Miami, etc., etc. So we're living in unpredictable times. The next one is something that I don't think many of you will know about because currently it's only a rumor and it's 3 weeks old. But we had an ALVA heads of fundraising meeting 2 weeks ago at Buckingham Palace, and this was one of the issues that we were talking about. Trump and his advisors have said that they don't want American philanthropists giving to causes outside of the USA. Now, I don't know whether that will turn into an executive order or whether that will turn into, bullying is the wrong word, but assertive encouragement. There's a real issue here for American friends of groups of British UK cultural organisations and institutions, including museums and galleries and heritage sites, etc., etc. That if there's a mechanism for stopping the philanthropic flow of money from the United States to the UK, that poses some really serious issues and challenges to many organisations in the room. And one of the consequences of that is that because federal funding has been stopped to Harvard and some of the Ivy League universities and cultural organizations like the Smithsonian, American benefactors are saying, they need my help first before I can think about giving internationally. So I think there's a double whammy about this rumor. One is potentially drying up some of the source of American philanthropy, and the second is because of federal funding decisions, the federal funding that may have come to us going to US cultural and higher education institutions as well. If you have an American Friends of group, talk to CAF America or talk to Chapel in York, who many of you will work with, to see what's the latest information, are the rumors true, what might be the consequences for you. And because this is so early and so recent, it may well be that your chief execs or your board of trustees or even your fundraising colleagues, this isn't on their radar yet. Put it on their radar. Sorry, we're in the trough bit now. I think that's probably clear. Rachel Reeves, last Labour budget in October of last year. The cumulative effect, no one disagrees with increases in the national minimum wage. If a cultural organisation in the UK is not paying the national minimum wage, you shouldn't exist. Just be really explicit about that. The combined effect of an increase of national minimum wage and the change in the national insurance employer's contribution and the lowering of the threshold is this. So again, we did a survey about what the net effect of all those three things will mean for our members. And so for a typical regional theatre, 100,000 straight on the payroll. Stately home between 200 and 400,000 pounds. National Museum, 700 to 800,000 pounds. National Performance Venue, 1.5. And if you're the National Trust, it will cost you 10 million pounds in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Now, these are all unplanned, unexpected, unanticipated, and unbudgeted increases in the payroll. And this, for many organisations, means that this year, 25-26, was anticipated to be the first year that they would make a profit or a surplus since COVID. That's wiped out. And for other organisations, adding this means it's wiped out some of their capital investment and expenditure plans. So the cumulative effect of all of this is that, I'm sorry, but I think that this year is likely to be more financially challenging for many visitor attractions than last year because of the cumulative effect and the confluence of all of these things all happening at the same time, plus throw a potential global economic imbalance into the mix and a potential US recession. This is supposed to be reassuring in that if you think that you're the only one going through this, you're absolutely not. I mean, ALVA members are amongst the largest and the most economically substantial and sustainable organisations in the UK, and yet this too is their reality. So this really is an opportunity to think, okay, we need to find our way around this. As I've been going through, we're moving into a happy place now. As I've been going through the last couple of years, I've been going to lots of our member trustee boards, and these themes come out of nearly all of them. So whether they're a museum, an art gallery, a zoo, a cathedral, a heritage organisation, whatever. So the first is they're all asking themselves the kind of existential questions about why should I exist? Why should we exist? Who do we exist for? Who comes? Who doesn't come? Why don't they come? And what are we going to do about it? And trying to measure the social capital and the social value that they provide and that they give. The second is if you haven't got the money to reinvest in visitor experience or capital projects, then how can you monetize what you've already got, your existing assets? And I'll come back to championing churches and gigs in York Minster for in a second, because you need to see it to understand it. There is, in my experience, a much greater appetite on the part of trustee boards about risk and deploying their reserves in a more creative, thoughtful way, rather than letting their reserves, if you have them, rather than letting those reserves sit in a bank account earning not very much money. But to start acquiring assets or investing in people or investing in the visitor experience. So much greater appetite for risk on the part of trustee boards. Fostering creative partnerships with unusual suspects. What I mean by this is working with theatre companies, or performers, or poets in residence, or artists in residence, or people who can tell the story of your places and people in collections, not necessarily better than you, but in a different way, in a different style, in a different language, and to a different fan base. And so some of those creative partnerships have been really quite extraordinary, but bringing in new demographic and audiences who haven't traditionally come. And then the last is if you have reserves, and it's a big if. We asked our members, if you have reserves, what are you spending them on? And the number one answer by a country mile was all year round, all-weather play facilities for kids. It's getting that family market back. So you'll have seen that very recently at Harewood House, just outside of Leeds, and also at Blenheim fairly recently too. So if you've got reserves, that's the number one thing. Second year round, festivals, but not just the normal food and beverage and beer festivals, but things like Warhammer festivals at a stately home site or at a castle site. Just really thinking about who is your fan base, or who could be your fan base, and teaming up with the third party who can bring them on site. So York Minster, home of the Archbishop of York, second most important church in the Church of England, had Plague of Angels, that rock band, playing inside York Minster fairly recently. And York Minster did not catch fire as a result. So just really, this is really finding your tolerance levels and your comfort zones. But Plague of Angels brought in, as you might well expect, a completely different demographic into York Minster. In the same way that a few years ago, having the Helter Skelter at Norwich Cathedral, do you remember that? And the Crazy Golf at Rochester Cathedral, Daily Mail hated it, which I think is quite a good reason for doing it in the first place, but let's park that. But in a completely different demographic. Champing has been around for about 10 years, I think, created by the Church's Conservation Trust. Champing is church camping, so you can sleep in unconsecrated, unused churches. Been phenomenal for the Church's Conservation Trust. Apart from Brits' number one audience, the other, can anyone guess which country loves champing here in the UK? Which overseas country is their number one overseas market for champing? Any guesses? Holland, very close. Germany, very good. Phenomenal. Then this stuff too, monetizing your existing assets. Roof tours, particularly of cathedrals. The roof tour of Westminster Abbey, I think sold for about 80 quid, 90 quid. Lasted 90 minutes. You were taken round the roof of the Clerk of the Works. I did it last year. I'd forgotten that the roof of an abbey is made of lead, and it was the hottest day of the year, and I was wearing burnt my soles, so in so many senses now I think about it. So roof tours, behind the scenes tours. It is no coincidence that under lockdown, the number one terrestrial TV program that had the biggest increase in viewership was Repair Shop. People love seeing things being made and repaired. So if you've got a back behind the scenes making craft, monetize that. Third thing, marriage proposal products. This has now exploded. So more and more people are thinking, well, we've got a fan base, we've got a loyal audience, let's create a marriage proposal product. This started off for me with the Royal Opera House, who created a marriage proposal. Is Sam still there? She was over here. A marriage proposal product, 500 quid. You get a private tour of the Royal Opera House. You end up in the royal box. The proposal takes place. The photograph is taken, and you get a bottle of champagne and a ticket, the Royal Opera House ticket with your names on and the date. Really sweet. And when I shared this with an audience, Chatsworth put up their hands and said, we do that for £1,000. And then it turned into a kind of mad Dutch auction. So more and more people are monetizing the marriage proposal product at your site. And I'm really happy. So this is the one at Royal Museums Greenwich, outside the Royal Observatory and the Planetarium. The last one is Meet a Gardener, and I unwisely described it as your kind of one-to-one Monty Don moment. I don't mean monetizing in that way, because that's illegal. But this is your chance to talk to an RHS gardener or a National Trust gardener, and for 50 quid for an hour, £100 for half an hour, whatever it is, and ask them, it's almost that gardener's question time. What should I be doing in the garden this week? I've got this problem, can you tell me what it is? Those money can't buy, yet funnily enough it can. Rare, exclusive, behind the scenes, braggable experiences are really, really selling, even in a cost of living crisis. There's about 17% of the population who say they are unaffected by the cost of living crisis. Sell them the really expensive behind-the-scenes exclusive gigs and use that money to subsidize your cheap and discounted access to everybody else. Fulfill your social purpose that way. And my last slide is the reasons to be cheerful. Given everything that I've said, it is still the case that the most expensive theatre seats sell most quickly. Because people are saying, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to have this experience, it better be good, and I'm prepared to pay for it. The consequence of that is that their expectations of a good or excellent experience are now through the roof, as your front of house staff will tell you. People are not afraid or cautious about complaining. Secondly, I've just explained. And third, this is given everything that we've talked about, from economics to recession to Trump, given everything that I just talked about, this is still the most important thing of the last 30 minutes. People still want and will pay for special times with special people in special places. I suppose the challenge to you is, what's yours? And in particular, what's the one that you're going to create for you this year, in a year of what will be unpredictable degrees of turmoil? Thank you very much, and I'm really happy to take any questions.
Okay, let's hear it for Bernard, please. Bernard, you come over here and you put on your earpiece. Just put it in that other ear. Okay, we have time for possibly a couple of questions. Put the microphone up close. That was very fast. Out the blocks.
Thank you. Bernard, that was really interesting. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Do we have any evidence about not having pay-by-cash facilities at visitor attractions? We dropped it in the pandemic. We've never brought it back because it takes a lot of time and cost to process it. But you mentioned it as universal credit barrier.
Yeah.
That's been picked up in our organisation. So any evidence at all? Thank you.
Yes. My encouragement would always be to provide an opportunity for people to pay cash at all possible, and particularly for two groups. One is people who are coming in on your £1 or discounted tickets for universal credit. They are more likely to use cash than debit cards. The second group, three groups. Second group, cash donations at cathedrals to pay for candles. I mean, that's quite niche. I appreciate that. Third group, kids spending money in shops, because grandma doesn't give her 7-year-old child her debit card. That way, madness ensues. But they will give them a £10 note or coins. So if you're not taking cash, particularly in your gift shops that are aimed at kids, you're really missing out on a big market. So I get it, I completely get it, but I'd really encourage everybody to take cash if at all possible.
Bernard, hi.
Hi.
Thanks for a great talk. Thanks for a great talk. Lots of your examples, obviously the organisation you're from, it's about leading visitor attractions. I wondered if you had any reflections for small museums, galleries, heritage attractions, small and medium organisations, which are different from those big organisations that you're representing.
Yeah, no, good question. Most of those things are translatable. So creative partnerships, so working with a local theatre company or working with a nearby theatre or a local museum and actually having some of those partnerships, that's translatable. Second one would be the memorable experiences and talking to a programmer about Halloween activity. I mean, not appropriate for churches necessarily, but Halloween activities and winter lights, those kind of things. Guest talks coming in, particularly from gardeners, regardless of the kind of organisation you are, really important. Wine tasting, those kind of things. School groups. Actually, there was an article in The Guardian yesterday that I contributed to. School groups have largely recovered to the big visitor attractions because usually they have some sort of subsidy mechanism to pay for the travel. For smaller museums and galleries, real issue. So again, working with local bus companies, I think it's a good thing, by the way, that local bus companies are going back into public ownership, because I think it's much more likely that a public-owned bus company will come out and find that extra mile tour or subsidise some bus routes for children and school groups. And I suppose the last thing to say is that we're notoriously bad in the UK about asking for money from people who love us. I mean, I'm not talking about personal relationships, although actually, yes. But your loving fan base, we're not Americans, so we don't ask them for money as much as we should. And actually, we really, really should. Which brings me back, I suppose, to that missing generation. And we really need to get them back, regardless of the size of the organisation.
Got time for one more question from the floor. Any more questions?
Oh, there's one over here.
Where's that? Oh, yeah, right over there.
By the way, I'll stay behind at the end, so if anyone's got any burning questions or wants to confess anything, I mean, I'm quite open for that.
Hi, speaking as an oldie here, did your visitor experience survey cover anything to do with the woke agenda and people's feeling about interpretations of what they're seeing?
No, I can genuinely say that didn't come up at all. It was much more the more kind of profound disincentives around COVID in particular, but actually crowded spaces. So wanting to, do you mind just moving to the right? That's brilliant. We were just broadcasting the back of your head then for a second. So no, it didn't come up at all. And actually, what we're finding outside of ALVA, I chair London and the South East region for the National Trust. And of course, we have to deal with the kind of woke conversation all the time. I mean, essentially what we're all doing is telling a fuller, more nuanced story of history in the past, rather than trying to encapsulate something which is palatable to a particular audience. I think that's the way to go, and it should be morally the right thing to do. But that didn't come up at all in the survey feedback.